Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Wisconsin Peer Recovery Conference. We are super excited to be here and to be sharing this information with you, although this looks a little bit different than I believe they've done things in years past. So we are comfy in our homes, but we're still super excited to share this information with you guys. So my name is Ashley. I'm the Director of Domestic Violence Victim Services at the Bridge to Hope in Menominee. I have been with the Bridge to Hope in a few different positions for going on 9 years now. And before that, I was a social worker in treatment foster care. So I've had the opportunity to sort of work in, different areas and learn how trauma-informed care really influences different populations. So Angie?
Hi, my name is Angie. I am the Director of Sexual Assault Victim Services here at the Bridge. I've been at the Bridge for almost 5 years. I started out as a Pepin County advocate and then worked my way into sexual assault work. Before that, I was a stay-at-home mom, but as a survivor of sexual assault, I knew that that was the work that I wanted to get into. So here I am today. So today we're going to take a closer look at the struggles that domestic violence and sexual assault survivors might face when they're healing from their trauma and moving forward. We're going to be discussing what trauma-informed care is at its core and the different barriers that survivors might face to feel safe, and that might look like finding housing, employment, or transportation. And we're also going to talk about the trauma-informed approach we take as professionals that has worked in forming relationships and establishing trust. So the learning objectives that we're going to work with today are: number one, trauma-informed care at its basics, how our agency specifically approaches survivors in order to build trust and help them move forward. And two, the art of self-disclosure. When is it relevant and what are your experiences sharing your own story with survivors?
So I'm going to talk a little bit about who we are, just a brief overview of our agency, but we also want to know who we're talking to today. This webinar is pre-recorded, but we will be available at the end for any questions or any comments. We do encourage you to use that chat box and to talk with us. We want to talk at the end about the information you've learned. So we're going to put up a poll of who we're speaking to. Where do you guys work? What kind of work do you do? So as Angie said, we work at an agency called the Bridge to Hope. Our mission is sheltering, supporting those affected by domestic violence, human trafficking, and sexual assault. We are a crisis center for survivors of those things. We have a 21-bed emergency shelter for anyone who is fleeing abuse and needs a safe place to stay. We also provide sexual assault advocacy, including our 24-hour response team, legal advocacy, support groups of various kinds, and a 24-hour crisis line. We also focus hard on safety planning for the people that call in. So 3 years ago, we were in a 3-bedroom apartment. Our shelter was a 3-bedroom apartment. Our offices were in a house. Essentially, the apartment was at the top. All our offices were in the living room and the kitchen. Rooms off of rooms. It was just a house, basically. We were doubling up families in each room in order to meet basic needs as far as safety goes. So we essentially had no privacy. No one had any privacy, really. We didn't have a private space to meet with any of our clients that were coming in to speak with us. Shelter clients did not have a safe space to heal, no privacy in their own rooms. So it wasn't until we moved into this new space of ours about 3 years ago, coming on 3 years now, that we realized how trauma-informed care really plays a part in every detail of someone's success in healing and a part of the services that we were providing. I do believe that we were doing the best with the space that we had. However, since moving, we've just realized the success of people has drastically changed. With these different things that we were able to implement, such as meeting with an advocate one-on-one in a private area where we can shut the door if they're comfortable, those kinds of things. So that's what we're talking about today, just what we have found as people and as survivors providing these services that has worked for us.
So to begin, we're going to talk about a little bit what trauma is. So there is really no universal definition of trauma. Individual trauma results from an event or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual that can be physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening and has lasting adverse effects. So that could look like a number of different things, including sexual assault. It could include domestic violence, intimate partner violence, natural or man-made disasters, historical trauma. The list just goes on and on. So it's really hard to have just like a small definition of what that really looks like, and it's going to really be different for each individual.
What might look traumatic for me might not be traumatic if Angie had experienced that as well. And that's important for us to keep in mind, is something that we may view in our own brains as not being a big deal is very much affecting that person that we're speaking with, and to remember that.
So then, why is trauma-informed care important? Number one, because it focuses on understanding the whole individual in context of his or her life experience. It's designed to minimize the possibilities of victimization and re-victimization. It hopefully facilitates recovery. It facilitates growth and resilience and healing, which we're going to talk a lot about later in the presentation. It helps form a relationship based in partnership with the survivor, which minimizes the power imbalance between the advocate and the survivor. So we're really going to talk about those power dynamics as well. Trauma-informed care really focuses on trust and safety, and it allows us to collaborate with non-traditional and expanded community support, such as our faith communities, friends, families, outside of just agencies within the community.
So how does trauma look different for domestic violence survivors? So domestic violence is by its nature chronic. So they're not discrete episodes of trauma. Rather, domestic violence is an ongoing traumatic experience for all members of the family. So, you know, we do have a youth advocate also who will address issues of children who come in who have witnessed domestic violence but haven't been a primary victim. It still very much affects that. We recognize that a mom who is calling about her son or daughter who's experiencing domestic violence, that's also incredibly traumatic for them to hear about the things that are happening to their loved one. It absolutely affects everybody in that person's life who's that primary victim. The perpetrator of the traumatic experience is a loved one. This is something that I think has taken me it took me a little bit to wrap my head around. Most survivors will be interacting with their perpetrator on a regular basis. The violation of trust and disruption to interpersonal connections is more severe due to trauma occurring in the context of an intimate relationship. So that's something that, you know, we see pretty often and have to sort of check our reactions to that. I think that can drive someone away if we are shaming them or making seem even that we don't necessarily agree with their choices. That can push people away from seeking services at a later date if they need that. And so we have to, you know, at some point, I'm sure that there was really good things about this person, you know, that they enjoyed. And so it's important for us to recognize that this is, you're mourning a loss essentially when you leave that person.
So sometimes domestic violence shelters can be re-traumatizing for survivors. That could look like different things. Some shelters might not have locks on the doors, which could lead survivors to feel like a lack of privacy. They might not have a private space to have confidential conversations. So like Ashlee was talking about earlier, in our old space, we didn't have those confidential places like offices that you could just shut a door, and that could be really triggering for folks. It also might be re-traumatizing just being around other families who have different standards of cleanliness. They might have different parenting styles than you, different definitions of what quiet time is. We all live differently, and it can be really re-traumatizing to be around those folks that maybe, you know, parent just a little bit different than us. So we want to be cognizant of that and make sure that, we're trying to understand that everybody's different. And some shelters might have staff or shelter residents that mirror abusive behaviors by having like super rigid or excessive rules that might look like power and control dynamics. So we want to make sure that we're not, you know, showing those same behaviors as their abuser was showing, and to be understanding about that.
Well, and abuse can be a learned behavior too. So if we have someone coming into our shelter, coming into our office who has had this cycle of abuse for their entire life, it's not uncommon to mimic those behaviors. So then we're putting basically a whole bunch of traumatized people in one space. It's almost, we never really quite know what's going to happen. And so we recognize that shelter is not always the answer for people who are calling in. And I know that we've had to sort of explain that too to outside agencies who may be calling in looking for someone, some people that we work with who may be looking for a client that they work with for emergency shelter. That's why we have our eligibility form. I know that that's, hard to understand since that's the primary need, but sometimes that's not what's going to help them. And that's why we have all these different advocates with different specialties as well, so that we can figure out what else can we do to help this person to be safe, because that is our primary goal. So some barriers that survivors may face. So a lack of transportation is one of those things. We are in a small town and don't have great public transportation, especially if they had one family car, or the perpetrator did not fix their car so that they couldn't drive it, or took their car so that they couldn't get to us. Those kinds of things. That's hard to then get around to fill out job applications, or to get to the grocery store to get what your kids might need for the night. So another thing is housing shortages. Again, in our area, it's a college town. There's not a whole lot of affordable housing here that's not college housing, which college housing can then also be re-triggering to a survivor once they get into that, and realize also that then there's loud noises all the time, or if people are up late, living their best lives, that sometimes that can be re-triggering to someone as well. And here it just seems like there's just a really big lack of affordable housing, not having access to proper nutrition. So we have a food pantry. However, it's not a full service food pantry, and it's mostly canned goods and things with a lot of preservatives in them. And I think that when people are deciding whether or not they want to leave an abusive relationship, that they think about all these things. How am I going to provide food for my kids? How are they going to be healthy? Will this person help me out? Am I going to have to go back once I leave, and it'll cause more issues? So that's another barrier. Unemployment, that's a big one. We get people in who have not been allowed to work. They've been stay-at-home moms. They have no education or job training also. So this is kind of just like starting from the ground up again to get them everything that they may need. Criminal background is also a huge one. Trauma can cause all sorts of things, to using drugs and alcohol to cope. You can get roped into things by your abusive partner, or take the rap for things that weren't even your fault as well in order to please someone. This leads to then a poor criminal background, which can lead to not being able to find a proper job that pays you a living wage, or not being able to get into an apartment that's that's HUD funded, or anything that's affordable at this point. Language and cultural differences. We are a small town, but we do have people come in who speak a different language. We do not have, anyone on our staff right now who's bilingual, so we use a language line. Super impersonal. Not something that someone really needs or wants when they're in a crisis situation, is for us to say, hold on, let me pick up a phone and dial a phone number, so that we can connect with someone else that you have to tell your story to again. And that can make them super afraid to leave in the first place as well, if they think that no one's going to be able to understand them or speak their language. Unfamiliar with legal terms and processes. I've had several people come to me who have possibly lost their children, and, in the system, and had no idea why. One in particular had a 3rd grade reading level. She could not afford a lawyer. And she lost her children, and she to this day could not figure out exactly what had happened in that courtroom because she had no one supporting her. No childcare. We all know childcare is super expensive, especially if you have multiple children. Even if you have childcare assistance, it's spendy. So that's also a barrier, especially if maybe that other person was the caregiver. She was the caregiver while someone was giving her him or her money, to take care of the family. And then no access to affordable health care. So imagine having to leave your home, although super, abusive and not healthy, and then having to jump through all of these things in order to get into a space that's safe for you and your kids. Even just looking at that now for me is, it makes my heart sink, to have to think that someone who is, finding that courage to leave their home, then it gets worse before it gets better. So those are just some of the barriers that we have found that our survivors face when they come to us.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so important that we really practice trauma-informed care, because just the intersection of all of these things, like survivors aren't just facing 1 or 2 of these things. That's generally most of these things. So we want to make sure that they're getting, that we're being trauma-informed when we're talking to them.
Oh, there's more. So just a few continued ones are poor credit and ruined rental history. So a lot of people who come to us also have had several evictions, whether that's due to, them not being able to pay, or the abusive partner punching a hole in the wall and being evicted. That still shows up on their record, and that's really all that a landlord looks at. Initially, is what's on that piece of paper. So we provide a lot of landlord advocacy too, calling and saying, hey, this person is more than what you see. Let's get together so that you can meet them, and then we can go from there. And that's super important for them to have someone in their corner just kind of pushing, when they maybe don't have the energy to. A lack of steady employment, especially if they've been forced to leave a job. I had someone once who she would get a job, and then her abuser would continue to come down there, and then she would lose the job. And that was a pattern for her over several years. And so then other employers would look and say, oh, you've had 10 jobs in the last 3 months, you're not dependable. Those kinds of things. Housing discrimination. So the most common cases of this occur when landlords evict victims from housing due to repeated calls to the police or property damage caused by the abuser. And loss of, loss of subsidized or other affordable housing, due to, could be the abuser or policy breaches as well.
I think another one that's not listed too is the fact that a lot of housing places don't accept pets, or that the abuser threatens the pets or won't give folks their pets. And I think that's one of the reasons that we accept pets into our shelter, because we know like pets are a part of our family, and that's a huge barrier to survivors leaving their abusers. So we're going to move on and talk about the 6 principles of trauma-informed approaches, and we're going to go over these throughout the presentation, and look a little closer at each one. But first is safety. So that's talking about both the physical and psychological safety. We want to make sure that that's a priority within our organization, and that's for both the staff and our clients that we serve. We want to understand how people perceive safety, and that's going to look different for everybody. And we'll talk more about that part later. We want to make sure that we're being trustworthy and transparent. That's within our operation between staff and with our clients. Peer support, so people's stories and lived experiences are valued and recognized as key to building safety. So we want to make sure that we are promoting self-help and peer support. Collaboration and mutuality. We recognize that everyone has a role to play in trauma-informed approach, and that's where we really take a look at power differences between staff and clients. We want to make sure that we are on the perceived same level. We are going to take a closer look at empowerment, voice, and choice, especially within an advocacy standpoint. We really look at individual strengths and experiences, and we really want to empower folks to be able to make good, healthy choices. And then finally, we're going to look at cultural, historical, and gender issues. Within our organization, we want to make sure that we're actively moving past cultural biases, offering access to gender responsive services, and just making sure that we're looking at people as a whole and their culture, not just what they're experiencing right now.
Okay, so that first pillar that Angie mentioned was safety, especially, you know, working with someone who's a survivor, safety is a huge concern. So we start by explaining the what and the why of what we're doing. That kind of plays into transparency as well. But even with our policies and procedures, we explain, you know, what they are, why we do that, and so that they know that they can trust what we're saying. We have a reason behind what we're doing. We're not just trying to exert, you know, any power and control over them. Allowing victims to be accompanied by an advocate or a trusted friend or family member. I think that with anyone who's experienced trauma, this is super important. If they want to come into my office and bring their sister with them every time that we meet, that's absolutely fine by me. We can have someone else in the room. We can also be that trusted person and accompany them to doctor's appointments or therapy appointments. I know a lot of folks have had negative experiences with, you know, other service providers, and this just kind of, you know, opens up that door to be able to move forward and trust those processes that we really need to heal, and recognizing why that's important. Recognizing and taking steps to minimize situations that could cause distress. So constantly reevaluating why you're doing things, why you're putting those things into place. Why are those rules important within your agency or within your work that you're doing? You know, and if something triggers someone, then let's reevaluate. Let's figure out how we can either rephrase those things that we're putting into place so that our language is less, has less power and control dynamics, or let's wipe it out and let's start over. How can we still keep people safe or still do our jobs, but implement something that causes a little bit less distress to people? And then safety planning. So not all survivors are ready to leave their abusive relationship. We recognize that, we see that a lot. I think that's especially hard for family and friends to sort of wrap their heads around. You care about people so much, you don't want to see them in this terrible situation. We then will safety plan. If someone calls in, we make sure that we kind of walk through what can you do if you're feeling anxious? What can you do if you're feeling like you need police presence, but it's not safe to call the police? We either do that verbally or we have several different versions of safety plans that we can write down for people. Generally, they want to do that verbally, just have that inside of their heads so they don't have anything laying around for anyone to see. But I think that causes then a little less anxiety kind of moving forward for them, knowing that they have a plan, they have a backup, they have support if they need it again. So safety is also part of predictability and structure. Sorry. So we put a lot of different things in place that people know that they can count on. So we have a lot of security measures. Our building is locked 24/7. Our alarms go on, you know, at nighttime. They know that if they open up a door, they open up a window, that those alarms are going to scream intruder. Those are things that people can count on, and they know that they're going to have help when they need it or if they need it. We've created quiet spaces with comfortable chairs and music. We go crazy with the essential oils, just diffusers everywhere. People feel calm. Our senses. We made sure that our lighting was not harsh lighting. We put in the soft white lights in our offices, just kind of creating that initial ambiance of just peace and comfort when people come in, so that they're not already on edge in a really scary situation. Confidential group locations. Right now we're doing that via Zoom, but we make sure to take all the measures that we can to we blind CC emails. We make sure that we don't use full names if people don't want that done. We just ask a lot of in-depth questions as far as what people are comfortable with. You don't have to have your camera on. Typically then we will, when it's not a pandemic, we have our groups in person, but we do the same thing. You don't have to speak. If you would rather call in so that people can't see you, absolutely. Just making sure that everything is confidential so they know that we care about their confidentiality. That's predictable from them. They know that we're going to provide those things for them. We provide safety gates for children and covered electrical sockets and anything they might need to make the shelter or any space that they're in kid-friendly. We provide private lockers with keys. Only they have access to those combinations, those keys. That's their private stuff that they can get into when they need it. All of our restrooms, all of our bedroom doors have locks on them. You lock that door if you're feeling unsafe. We encourage that so that they can feel safe within our shelter when there are still other people around. They know that we're going to meet their basic needs of access to food, warmth, water, and beds. We go above and beyond with meeting needs for people if they have dietary restrictions. Clean rooms, clean bedding, clean common areas. We put expectations as far as cleanliness on some of the shelter clients, but they know that that's our expectation from the start. I think that we believe, or I believe anyway, that when things are cluttery around you, that your brain can be cluttery. They don't need to come in and worry about, well, now I have to wash my own bedding, or I have to bring my own bedding, because they don't provide that. We make sure that everything is set up for people when they get to us so that they don't have to worry about those things. We have a no weapons policy. We post that everywhere so people know that that's not allowed into our shelter, into our office area. And then lock procedures for medications for residential shelters. So we lock up all the things that could harm someone. And again, we make sure that that's known from the beginning, so that's predictable for people.
And that leads right into the next slide, which talks about our trustworthiness and transparency. And part of transparency is making sure that clients are fully informed of all of our expectations. And that's what Ashlee was kind of talking about. They know what to expect when they come into shelter. We sit down, we do an intake process with them, we spell everything out. We make sure that they're also given a handbook that just goes over all the things that we had already gone over with them verbally, but that way they have their own copy and they can fully look over it when they're feeling a little more calm and collected, because as you know, if you're coming into shelter, you're probably not in the best headspace to be able to remember all these things that we're going over with you. So we make sure that they have that copy and that they can go over it when they have the time and are able to think more clearly. We also always make sure that we are aware of reducing our power dynamics between advocates and clients. And that looks like a variety of different ways. For instance, when we're in a room with a client and we're having a one-on-one conversation, we're not going to be standing above them while they're sitting in the chair. We always want to sit next to them or so that we're facing them. We want to make sure that we're wearing clothing that makes us approachable. That could look like just wearing business casual so that we're not in a suit and tie talking with somebody and have that perceived power dynamic. We still look professional, but still approachable. And we also keep in mind that all of our relationships influence each other, and that's with it from staff to staff and staff with clients.
So peer support. We offer kind of a variety of different opportunities for people to get together who have experienced some of the same things. We have our support group. We create opportunities within our shelters so that people can get to know one another. They can develop those friendships if they're wanted or needed, because we think that that's absolutely necessary, to be relatable and to know that other people are going through the same things as you. And this is when we're going to kind of talk about too the art of self-disclosure. So domestic violence services originally emerged from a peer-based movement. The trauma-informed care movement really owes a debt of gratitude to the peer support services. That's really what it was built off of, is people who have experienced trauma, who have experienced domestic violence, who are then helping other people who have experienced trauma and domestic violence because they feel strongly about, they know what that's like. They want to help people to get out. So, and I think that that's continued on also within our agency and domestic violence agencies, is that a lot of the advocates have also experienced some of the same things as the clients who are coming in to us. I know Angie had disclosed, and I am also a survivor. And so we kind of go through in our heads a few different things as far as whether or not we want to disclose. Angie, could you move your mouse so that the little thing down on the bottom doesn't pop up?
It keeps.
We kind of go through. It's okay. We kind of go through a few different things in our heads. So as we're talking with someone and we feel that the urge to kind of disclose that we are also a survivor, or that we have been through similar situations, I think, will this hurt or will this help? So whatever that looks like to you, is this going to damage our relationship, or is this going to help our relationship and help this person to trust me a little bit more? Will I be triggered by this information? So I think that one's super important. I've been out for almost 9 years of my relationship. I feel like I've worked through a lot of things. You have to be able to work in this field. I think that's really important. But there are still some things, I think, that just trigger us unknowingly. We just aren't really sure when that's gonna pop up. So just stop and think: is me sharing this information with someone who is also going to trigger me? Where are my boundaries? I think when working with people in general as service providers, we have to have super strong boundaries or firm boundaries. As far as how far am I going to go with this person? When am I going to be uncomfortable with, sharing a little bit too much? Am I making this situation about me, or am I becoming relatable? These people are not here to be our advocates necessarily. We are here to be their advocates and to speak for them. So we have to make sure we're not making that situation about us, but instead, this is a nugget of information that's going to help you trust me. This is a nugget of information that's going to help you, to come to me next time when you're feeling something that you think no one else is going to understand. Because I think that, domestic violence victims, sexual assault victims, human trafficking are often isolated. They may think that what they're going through is normal, that they deserve those things. No one else is going to understand, and so I'm going to stay. So sometimes it is really important to say, you know what, I get it. I get it. I've been there. Oftentimes that's enough. That's up to you and your boundaries and what you're comfortable with. Can this information be used against me in the future? So I, for one, never reveal my address. I never reveal my phone number. I know some people have not wanted their last names known. Where are your boundaries, and what can you give without giving too much? And then will this strengthen our relationship, which I already kind of spoke about? Is this going to make our relationship better by me, relating to the things that you've been through?
And I think one of the spaces that self-disclosure has been so important with knowing when is appropriate is with our support group. There's several members of the support group that when we do different activities really expect us to participate as well. And so just knowing when that's appropriate to make them comfortable and make them want to share more, and then knowing when that's going to be hurtful. So, and that can be really tricky when you're working with numerous clients together who are, can kind of all want you to share.
We're going to do a little, if you could go back, we're going to do a little poll here too. I'd just like to know who has also had experiences with self-disclosure, and if you felt like that was uncomfortable, or if that was kind of easy for you to gauge. And then you can also kind of type something in the chat box too, just about your experiences, because I'd love to hear that.
Yes, please. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about collaboration and mutuality. So one of the things that we do in our agency is that although all of our advocates have their own specialty, I guess you could say, we are all cross-trained with each other. So Ashley's the director of domestic violence services. If she's not in the office and we have a domestic violent client that just wants to talk about her healing process, I can then talk with the client about what she's going through, and we can help move her forward. Or Valerie, for instance, is our legal advocate. If she's not in a day, Ashley can jump in and help do a restraining order with somebody. It's really hard when you have a small staff and a small community. You want to make sure that we can all help each other out. And plus, it allows us to have empathy with each other as staff members to know what we're going through as a team. And to remember that we work together, not in a silo, and that's just not within our agency, but in our community as well. We have really good relationships with all kinds of agencies in our community, whether it be faith-based community agencies or the school system, law enforcement, human services, for example, all just different sorts of places that it really helps clients so that they don't have to retell their story a million times, first of all, and to know that they have somebody that can maybe do one meeting with them and have everybody in one space, so they don't have to be running to this place and this place and this place, when we can all get it accomplished at one time. And then again, as we talked about earlier, just reducing that power dynamic, and that looks like the clothes that we choose to wear, the expectations that we put into place with clients, sitting versus standing when talking with clients, and then really offering choices instead of making the decisions for our clients. And we're going to talk about that coming up when we talk about empowerment, because that's going to be really important when we're trying to promote healing with our clients.
I also think, Angie, if you go back a little bit, excuse me, that collaboration has really helped us to just be better advocates too. I think we found, no one is going to connect with everybody, right? So we found that the more we rely on each other, if someone comes in that maybe I know, we're a small community, or I find that maybe I have a personality conflict with, or they just don't trust me, there's still going to be somebody else in that agency that they're going to be able to connect with if I can't do it. And that was the main mission of our cross training, and making sure that everybody has kind of their one thing, but we can also do everything so that we can better provide services to anyone. No one has to wait. No one has to meet with someone that they're uncomfortable with. We just kind of make sure that we're all collaborating as a staff to provide the best services we can for people.
Yeah, exactly.
So the next part is empowerment, voice, and choice. So we make sure, I think it's important to empower people that we're working with, obviously give them a voice, give them a choice. So we start by asking just like simple questions. And I think that anyone can put this into place. I think even when you have a friend or a family member who's maybe going through a few different things, this can really give them some power back. So we start by asking simple questions. What would you like to be called? Do you have a name that you prefer, especially if it's someone who has like maybe a family name or something that they're not comfortable with? We will call you whatever you're comfortable with. Where do you prefer to sit, in our office or maybe in a conference room where the space is a little bit bigger? Is there anything that I can get for you? Let me get you that drink. Let me get you a little granola bar if you're hungry. Like, we want to make sure that people are comfortable in our offices. And then, would you prefer the door open or closed? I think this is the one that I found to be most triggering for people. I think that when they come in and I just automatically close that door, most people think that they're in trouble. I'm not their parent, but they obviously think that they're in trouble when they come in. So I always ask, do you prefer the door open or closed? Or just kind of using your intuition too. If you could see that someone's scared, there's a bunch of people in the hallway right now. Is it okay if I close that door so we're not bothering them? You're not in trouble, making kind of a little light joke about it or something, but figuring out what it is exactly that's triggering them too, if asking them isn't working, and kind of digging in on that. So continue by determining other ways to help victims regain control. Help identify and address the victim's safety needs. Safety looks different for everybody. We mentioned that earlier. Make suggestions that can increase safety. For example, ask the victim ask if victims feel safe being alone and if there's anything that would increase their sense of safety. So we've had some people who wear curtains, made them really uncomfortable because they felt like someone was standing outside. They couldn't see what was happening in the whole yard. We remove the curtains. Just like little things that we may not think of or may not be a safety issue to us, so that doesn't pop in our brain, but making sure that we're kind of really digging into what makes them feel safe. Give victims as much control as possible, such as letting victims decide when and where they want to talk and in what order to do things. So if they come in to us and it's the middle of the night, we do not make them do intake if they don't want to. If they need to go and take a nap first and then we get most of the intake done the next day, that's totally fine with us. You know, especially after experiencing something, you know, really traumatic, the last thing you want to do is a whole slew of paperwork. So, you know, just kind of making sure that they have control of what they do and when. Obviously, there are things that we have to get done in a timely manner, but just kind of those little things that we can do to make sure that they know that like we value their, you know, their time. Give victims as information to help them make informed decisions. So not telling them what to do, not leading them one way, but instead really laying out information so that they can make their own decisions. Explaining processes and who and what will be involved before beginning them. So there's a lot of fear of the unknown, especially in processes, court processes, or working with CPS, you know, things of that nature. Excuse me. So just making sure that we kind of explain that process as best as we can. Obviously, some of those things are really unpredictable, but just kind of, you know, giving our experiences or whatever that might be so that they have a little bit less fear and know kind of what to expect. Maintain a non-judgmental attitude to help victims power and control, regain power and control. Individuals who perceive judgment may immediately relinquish control to others to avoid further judgments. Yeah. Help victims identify their strengths. That's something that we really play off of. And we think that that's super important is we really identify those things right away. Like, oh, this person really likes to draw. This person is super empathetic. And then we just kind of hammer that home every time we see them, you know, like, can I get you a sketchbook? Or, you know, just kind of really building on those things that we can see that they're good at or that they love or that they're passionate about. And you know, building that up so that they can gain some confidence back. Treat victims as individuals rather than cases. These are really, you know, these are people telling you the most intimate parts of their lives, and once they do that, you know, they really consider us close because we know, you know, the most intimate parts about them. So these are people who need our help. So just kind of viewing them as that rather than a caseload.
Yeah, and to go back a little bit and talk about the process part, like explaining the processes, I think Ashley really nailed it, talking about how, like, even explain, you know, our legal advocate can go right to the courtroom and show survivors the courtroom, what it looks like, the layout. She can explain those definitions and things because it can be really scary. And also, we have a 24-hour SANE team, so going with victims to the hospital, explaining what the sexual assault nurse examination looks like, especially for sexual assault survivors where that trauma is so fresh, and then having to show and share like their private thoughts and their intimate moments is really re-traumatizing. So it's super important for advocates or friends and family members to be able to go with and show support and really explain what's going to happen, what that's going to look like, just to make it a little less scary for folks. And then we also want to look at someone's culture, their cultural background, and not just where they're at right now. So we want to make sure that we're focusing first on the person and their needs, and then in the context of their family and their culture. We work with survivors within their cultural traditions, their belief systems, or their physical and mental disabilities. And that could look like a survivor comes in who is from the Hmong community and they want to get services, but they're afraid because within the community, everybody knows each other. And so they want to perhaps go and talk with law enforcement. If they're reporting within their community, oftentimes they're going to steer them to somebody within their clan to talk with. So it can be, that's something that we want to be cognizant of, and that we're able to provide the best services for them and still be respectful of their community and their clan, their safety. And then we also want to identify barriers to accessing support and resource systems. And that could be based on their individual, their traditional, and societal views, and then access and barriers to obtaining services. So an example of that could be not having a ramp available for somebody that has a wheelchair, or if sexual assault or domestic violence isn't a talked about thing within your culture, excuse me, how do you then provide those services to folks that still need them? So maybe having a support group that's not called a trauma support group, but it's a cooking class, or you're going to get together and share stories or something. So it's not titled domestic violence support group or a trauma support group. It's, you know, maybe focusing on something else, but still giving survivors that space in order to open up and talk and heal. So then we also want to make sure that we're showing support. One of my favorite quotes is, "Why advocate? Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's just not." And I think that's super important, because I think a lot of people go around saying, well, I don't have to do anything about it because that person's going to. And it just keeps getting passed around. Like eventually somebody has to stand up and do something. And anybody can be an advocate. You know, that may be what we do in our agency as professionals, but you don't have to work at a domestic violence agency to be an advocate for somebody. To be an advocate for somebody, you want to provide emotional support. And that looks like a lot of different things. That could be reassuring the survivor that they're safe, providing empathy and support, validating their responses, encouraging the survivor to talk about what happened, but allowing them to talk about it in their own way, and discouraging feelings of guilt and blame. And I think the number one thing is to listen to somebody. Oftentimes we get people that call us just to vent, just to talk about their experiences. They don't necessarily want us to say anything or to do anything. They just want us to listen. And so that's extremely important. And I don't mean like listening just to, you know, reply back and forth, but just to sit and really hear what somebody's telling you.
So just some additional ways to help survivors cope. So keep these goals in mind when discussing positive coping with trauma survivors. And I think it's important to note the word positive. So there are a lot of ways that trauma survivors cope. I would say you know, I see a lot of using drugs and alcohol to cope. Just a lot of, you know, unhealthy to us mechanisms to cope with the things that they've been through. But coping skills should support the survivor making new and safe connections with other people. They've often been isolated. We want them to, you know, to be able to make those connections in order to heal and to move forward. Experiencing traumatic events undermines the victim's sense of safe relationships with literally anyone. And that's, you know, that trauma inside of us, PTSD inside of us, tells us that no one is safe, because at once you thought that this person was safe. So we want to really kind of build that up and help them to find ways to establish new relationships within their family, a friend group, or in the community. Telling the story of the traumatic experience is essential to healing. Not everyone is ready for that. We get sometimes little tidbits when people come in. Sometimes we'll get, you know, maybe that's all that they remember even of a traumatic event, is just little tidbits. Our society encourages and reinforces silence around women and men's experience of trauma. So breaking the silence can be an important means of coping when they're ready for that. That's not always the best thing to do right away, but we would encourage that whenever they're ready is to break that silence. It's normal to be affected by trauma for people who are primary victims, and then for people who are, you know, listening to that or hearing those stories. Having traumatic reactions is not an indication of individual pathology or weakness in any way. Reiterate that a lot. This does not mean that you are weak. There's no shame and the services that they're seeking to get help. Reactions are a body and mind's attempts at processing and healing and should be honored as such. Whatever they're going through, that's their process. That's their way to move forward. And then active listening. This is kind of 101 active listening, which is pretty basic, but an advocate will demonstrate attentive listening skills by listening to the individual with eyes and ears while observing the survivor's nonverbal body language. For example, leaning forward a bit, nodding your head in agreement. I would think that we would all know what active listening looks like. It's not just, staring at a person in their eye. It's repeating the things that they're saying, the last couple words of their sentence, or agreeing with what they're saying, or I know what you mean, or it sounds like this. So pitfalls include looking at paperwork, your cell phone, or the computer while the individual is talking with you. I always make sure to let them know I'm listening, but what we're talking about needs me to research something here. So please keep talking. I will keep looking at them. If there is a need for me to look away, just explain that. Let them know exactly what you're doing. Be transparent, so that they know why you're doing that and that you're still listening. Then limit interruptions in your work environment. And if interrupted, ask people to wait until your time has ended with that other person. This can make or break a second interaction. I mean, honestly, if someone comes to you, or even on the phone when you're speaking with someone, you can actively listen on the phone. They may not call back if they felt like you weren't hearing them. So although basic, it's really important.
Yeah, and I think that can be sometimes hard in settings like domestic violence prevention work, when we work crisis lines, for instance, and we answer a hotline call and someone might be telling us their story and all of a sudden the phone rings on the other line, or somebody comes to the door, or a shelter client needs your help. And so I think that again brings out the transparency, just being real with that person and honest and saying, I'm listening to you. I'm really sorry. I just have to take this call, but I'll be right back with you. And like just being as transparent and, making sure that they trust what you're saying and that you're listening to them.
And then empathy. Empathy is walking a mile in someone else's moccasins. Sympathy is being sorry that their feet hurt. I like that a lot too. So empathy is showing someone that you care about their feelings and experiences. An advocate will demonstrate empathy by identifying with and understanding the survivor's emotions, feelings, and situations. So, for example, we could say, I get the sense that you're feeling angry or disappointed by what you're sharing. This type of statement demonstrates an understanding of possible feelings and gives the individual the option of agreeing, rejecting, telling you, no, that's not what I'm saying, or feeling validated by the service provider's understanding of what's occurring. So this is a way to show them that we are listening and we get it.
So the do's and the don'ts of trauma-informed care. So we want to make sure that we are validating emotions, that we're being patient with our clients. It could take a long time for someone to get their story out, and it could go in a zillion different directions before it gets to the ending, and that's okay. It doesn't have to look a certain way. We want to recognize our own feelings and meet the client where they're at, and then be aware of trauma symptoms and use grounding exercises. I think we do that all the time. We have to recognize what triggers people and how people react to certain things, and then how to use those grounding exercises. Some don'ts: we don't want to ever question the survivor in front of their abuser. We never want to recommend couples therapy to people. I once had a judge that recommended that the couple just go get lunch together and figure it out. That's never a good thing to say to a victim. We don't ever want to categorize a victim into a good versus bad victim. We don't want to provide psychoeducation when a client is activated. So when they're at their peak and they're very upset, like it's not going to be beneficial. We don't ever want to give ultimatums. So I'm not going to help you unless you leave him. We've heard of other agencies doing that, and that can be really harmful to survivors. It could take somebody 8 to 10 times before they're going to leave their abuser, and they still need to have those skills and that safety plan and to know what to do when they are ready. We never want to force medication, and then we never ever want to assume that calling the police is the safest option for folks. Especially right now with the climate, we know that a lot of our survivors have had bad interactions with law enforcement. So we want to make sure that we're giving them the option whenever it's possible. Obviously, at sometimes some of these things are not possible, but whenever we can, we want to make sure that we're giving those options. So we're going to talk a little bit about resiliency. So resilience is the ability to bounce back from setbacks, and it can prevent stress from causing serious physical, mental, and emotional issues. So we want to make sure that we're practicing positive and often simple activities to frame our brain to be more resilient. So for children, that could look like having positive role models or mentors, having supportive adults in their life, their parental involvement, a caring community, having increased parent-infant contact, or an increased knowledge of child development. For everyone in general, that just looks like having supportive relationships, maybe going for a walk in the woods, practicing gratitude. We talk a lot with our clients about thinking of the good things that are happening. What are you grateful for right now, instead of what are the negative things happening? Having a healthy food and exercise, having positive instead of negative thoughts, smiling and laughing, volunteering or doing art or music. And then for adults, it gets a little more difficult, I would say, because you have to sit and acknowledge your trauma. And that can be really difficult for folks to acknowledge that something's going on. And then to seek support, that's a huge step in itself. I think that when survivors come to talk to us, that's the first thing we say is, thank you for coming and talking to us. We know how hard that was. And that also plays off of like showing them their strengths instead of their weaknesses. That was so strong of you to come and talk to us today, or to even pick up that phone and call us. And then to identify what our emotional triggers are, to come to terms with the fact that we might need mental health or substance abuse treatment. That can be a tough one for folks. And then to create safe and stable, nurturing relationships.
So for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through all of these things. We're kind of running low, and we want to still be able to answer some questions. So basically, resiliency can lead to a lot of really, really great things by practicing those things that Angie had just spoken of before. Yeah, so if you want to go to the next slide, Angie. So take care of yourself. This is a hard lesson, I think, for a lot of service providers, me especially. I dove right in, and that's it's hard to put yourself first sometimes when you care so much about your cause. But be aware of vicarious trauma. Doesn't matter who you are, hearing some of these stories or putting so much of yourself into other people can be really traumatizing for yourself. So just like keeping that at the forefront of your mind, making sure that you're okay, checking in with yourself every day. Find your tribe of coworkers. That's like my favorite one. I think for us at domestic violence agencies, we can't talk about the things that have happened within our agency to people outside of our agency. So making sure that we're having the trusted coworker or coworkers that we can speak with and debrief with after something really traumatic happens, or make dark jokes with when we need to cope with the things that have happened, laugh instead of cry, those kinds of things. I think that's really important. And again, these are just my things that I think that are really important. Taking care of yourself. There are a lot more things that you could do. Recognizing your own triggers, things that really prevent you from providing the best services that you could because of things that have happened in your life or things that just don't sit well with you. Recognizing that and making sure that you're doing something about it so that the person that you're serving gets the best help. Setting boundaries within yourself. Debrief cases with trusted coworkers. Celebrate your victories. I think lately there's been less and less, I guess, for me as far as what I would consider victories. But man, when we have them, we celebrate them so hard because I think that that's really important. This field it's difficult. It's difficult to overcome. It's difficult to move forward, as we showed you. with all the barriers that these people face. So when we have those victories, man, we party. So adjust your expectations, kind of leave those at the door. Everybody's different. They're going to handle their own situations different. And we need to meet those people where they're at. And then nourish your spirit. So whatever that means for you, whether that's a spiritual thing or meditation or whatever feeds your soul, do that. I think that that's really important every day, to just pour into yourself so that you can then pour into others.
And we just want to really thank you guys for coming and learning a little bit more about trauma-informed care today. I recognize that it's crazy busy right now, and we all don't have a lot of time to sit and take the opportunity to learn about things. So I really appreciate it. We're going to send out some additional resources for y'all, and we are here to answer any questions or if you have any comments. And we'll also send along the way that you can contact us if you have questions after the webinar that you weren't able to get to. And also check us out in the exhibit hall, where we have all the information for the Bridge to Hope and how to reach us. But we're really looking forward to hearing all your questions.